Was JonBenét Ramsey's murder linked to creepy satanic billionaires? If you have ever gone down the JBR rabbit hole, you know that it's one of the most confounding unsolved mysteries in history. Nothing about this case really adds up, and one piece of evidence will contradict any given theory you can come up with, no matter who you think was involved. Quick recap, there are basically 4 possible outcomes. Intruder did it. Someone broke into the Ramsey house, planned to kidnap JonBenét. Something went awry, and they ended up having to kill her and flee, but not before writing a detailed 3-page ransom note. John Ramsey did it. The autopsy revealed that there had been an ongoing molestation of JB, providing a possible motive for John killing her before the secret got out. This would require his wife Patsy to go along with the staged kidnapping for the rest of her life, despite John being a monster. Patsy did it. Possible motive. JB had been wetting the bed, and with the stress of the holidays, travel, and tight scheduling, Patsy snapped that night and disciplined JB too harshly and finished the cover-up by strangling her and staging a kidnapping. Burke did it. Circumstantial evidence makes this seem likely, but the injuries sustained to JB's body seem to require a lot more strength than a 9-year-old would be capable of. Now, after looking into this case a lot, it seemed like an endless riddle, with dead ends cropping up everywhere, and new pieces of information raising more questions than it can answer. I have an alternate theory that can only be discussed in a place like this, so bear with me. Now, John Ramsey was a very wealthy man. He was the CEO of a company that had, around the time of the incident, been valued at over $1 billion. His company, Access Graphics, was soon to be acquired by Lockheed Martin. John undoubtedly had connections in high places, was speculated to be a heavy donor to the Boulder Police Department, and had political aspirations. John and Patsy Ramsey were active and well-known members of their community. Quick side note, the JBR case has some eerie similarities to another case of a missing young girl, Madeleine McCann, a blonde girl around the same age who went missing, another alleged kidnapping in which the parents were heavily scrutinized in the wake of her disappearance. Now, many years later, attention gets drawn back to the case in the wake of the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein and the Pedogate scandal. The police sketches of the suspected kidnappers get released, and bear a striking resemblance to John and Tony Podesta, the 2 men being seen together, and at times being seen colluding with someone who looks a lot like Ghislaine Maxwell. Pick related, the police sketches of the alleged kidnappers compared to the Podestas. Back to JBR. One theory that I have never seen pointed out is that there was a third party, but that they did not force themselves in. They were let in and out. I guess this is only a hunch, but I suspect it's possible that because GDI, PDI, and BDI all have some fundamental issue when it comes to conflicting evidence, that there is some likelihood that there will be another explanation, especially if the IDI theory doesn't hold water, due to the fact that there were no signs of forced entry, other than a broken window, which had undisturbed cobwebs and other debris. My theory is that, given that JBR was a pageant girl, and the daughter of someone who is essentially a billionaire, that she attracted the attention of rich and powerful elite pedophiles. John Ramsey, who, make no mistake, is probably a sick bastard himself, essentially let other men use his daughter to gain favor. My guess is one of them had some kind of strangulation fetish and just went too far, and she had to be killed because there were visible abrasions to her neck and body. Then, the killer was allowed to walk, and whether the body was later discovered or not, the Ramseys needed to cover up the crime to protect their powerful friends and themselves. A person they were seen with, compared to Ghislaine Maxwell, a popular internet theory that arose from this case after the scandal was that the parents sold their daughter, McCann, into slavery. A few factors. Once the sheriff, who knew the family, made the choice to help cover it up, he had to keep covering for them, because you can't just stop obstructing justice in a high-profile case without anyone noticing. At best, your career in law enforcement is over. At worst, you go to prison for obstruction. By performing a cover-up, the police had already tainted all the evidence. An outside prosecutor, state police or FBI, would have had to arrest a lot of people, many of them cops, and prosecuted them all under RICO. That's an extremely difficult and expensive prosecution, with a high chance of failure. If the case is that high profile and you don't win, you're disgraced. Chances are good you wouldn't even gather enough evidence for the initial arrest warrants. If you beat the odds and win, you've made a lot of enemies in law enforcement, and put a child in jail for decades. The big mystery may be interesting to the public, but it's for rail for a career prosecutor. The pathologist found signs of repeated, but not extensive, sexual abuse. There was no evidence of forced intercourse with an adult. Nah, a scenario involving an eyes wide shut cult is just wild speculation with no real evidence for it. Nope. The father found the body, then faked the note to cover for his son. The note was also written with materials found inside the home. The sheriff saw through it pretty quickly, so the father begged his friend to help him. The sheriff made a bad decision, which he found himself stuck with, because now he was complicit. He could have come out a week later and said, "Look, I helped my buddy cover for his kid, but this has gotten out of hand," and then justice might have been served. But it would have been the end of his career, his friend's career, both their families, etc. There could have been better ways to shield the kid from severe consequences up front, but the awful nature of the crime had everyone panicked and led to bad choices early on. Holy shit, I didn't realize she was killed on Christmas night. More info on Lockheed Martin and their interference with the case. So that there is no confusion, I want to say here and insert that I do not think that Lockheed Martin was involved in the actual crime/death of JonBenét Ramsey. John Ramsey was the president of a company owned by Lockheed Martin. I have held much lesser positions than this for a company that does government military defense contract work, and this isn't like working at a typical corporation. The security measures and concerns are far greater. Additionally, Lockheed Martin was trying to sell Access Graphics in a fairly significant deal with GE at the time. So, wouldn't it be reasonable to think that maybe Lockheed Martin would want to immediately know about this fairly important issue of a missing child in ransom note found at the home of Access Graphics president? John Ramsey isn't just a father waking up on December 26, 1966 to these events. He isn't just a businessman waking up to these events. He is someone who is the president of a company owned by Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin, who is so mammoth in size, money, power, weapons, technology, secrecy. They are directly connected to the federal government of the United States and are the biggest arms dealer of the world. They are ranked 6th for lobbying spending and have been criticized for their influence in major political decisions. They ranked as one of only a few major military defense contractors. Getting back to my point though, John Ramsey heard Patsy scream, and while some of the details of what followed are somewhat debatable, the consensus seems to be that Patsy informs John Ramsey of the ransom note that she has found. They do a brief search for JonBenét and don't find her. John then tells Patsy to call 911 while he reads the note. "We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. Any deviations of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You and your family are under constant security as well as the authorities. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John." I pulled out anything that I thought might immediately stand out to someone like John Ramsey for him to think maybe he should contact Lockheed Martin about this incident. Even if this ransom note was immediately considered a hoax by John Ramsey, it's reasonable to assume that Lockheed Martin would most certainly still want to be informed immediately and want to make sure of that themselves. So, my initial questions are, why doesn't John read the note before instructing Patsy to call 911? Shouldn't he at least review the contents of the note to get a better sense of things? Is it possible that once reading the note, that John realized this was possibly more concerning than he initially considered it to be, and possibly had second thoughts about Patsy calling 911? Maybe he hung up on 911. Maybe he thought he should call Lockheed Martin first. I'm not saying this is what happened, just a consideration. I understand why John wouldn't want to mention ever calling Lockheed Martin. Possibly, he isn't allowed to mention any details concerning them, their protocols in such an event, or their involvement in this regard. However, why doesn't anyone else seem to discuss it? Further, the Boulder Police Department, and Ron Walker with the FBI also doesn't seem to mention John talking to Lockheed Martin, or any of themselves sensing any need to contact Lockheed Martin about this matter. That seems unusual to me, but maybe they also aren't inclined to speak publicly about this. For years with this case, some things have just nagged me. Why are there so many people acting in manners that seem out of the norm, to put it mildly? Why is the entire Boulder Police Department not following procedures? I've traced it as far back as John Eller being responsible. However, does it really stop at him? Why is the entire BPD blamed when really it's John Eller's fault? Why is the BPD's reason for this given as short-staffed, inexperienced, etc., when in reality, there was someone present who had training at Quantica, knew what they were talking about, and was suggesting correct procedures on the 26th of December, 1996 that would have avoided nearly every mistake made in the case. However, Larry Mason was ignored by John Eller, who continued to issue commands that broke procedure. John Eller found an excuse to remove Larry Mason from the case early on, which Larry Mason fired back with a suit against the BPD for this and won. Why isn't the FBI intervening in this case, even as they see the Lockheed Martin connection, and watch local law enforcement screw things up? Why is the DA bending over backwards for the Ramseys in manners that aren't typical? I mean, I get that the Ramseys were wealthy, but come on, were they that important? How are the Ramseys able to get a Washington, D.C. crisis manager and ex-FBI profiler John Douglas on their case? Not just anyone can call these people up and request their services. In fact, I've never heard of John Douglas providing these types of services to anyone else beside the Ramseys. So many times in this case I would wonder, what made the Ramseys so important that I would ever see such things happen, and such big-shot names? Then I stumbled across this article. In it, Fleet White mentions this. 1. That he thought that the grand jury had been delayed to protect Lockheed Martin's financial interests while trying to sell Access Graphics. As the Whites saw it, various entities connected to the case had strong reasons for delaying a grand jury investigation. Hunter, whose office rarely went to trial on homicide cases, was just one. Lockheed Martin, one of the state's largest employers, was another. The company had been attempting to sell Access Graphics at the time JonBenét was killed. Any risk that the company's top executives would be facing a possible indictment would not have helped the divestment plans. Lockheed Martin sold Access Graphics, an asset reportedly valued at around $200 million, to General Electric in late 1997. The grand jury began hearing evidence in the Ramsey case in September 1998. 2. Attorneys who had connections with Lockheed Martin and the Ramseys' chosen legal firm offered pro bono services to the Boulder Police Department. As the feud with the DA's office escalated, the Boulder Police accepted the aid of a dream team of free attorneys who offered to provide pro bono counsel in this case. Curiously, one of the attorneys had served as outside counsel to Lockheed Martin in several cases. The second belonged to a firm that had also represented the company. The third had been co-counsel with Hal Haddon, John Ramsey's criminal attorney, in another matter. The Whites met with members of this dream team, who said they were in favor of a grand jury, but they didn't seem to be in any particular hurry to get one. 3. That Colorado changed their laws concerning grand juries during this case. They had learned that an obscure new law, pushed by the Colorado District Attorney's Council in 1997, allowed a grand jury to issue reports in first-degree murder cases in which an indictment was not returned. The reports could even include a public exoneration of the unindicted, but the new law would only apply to juries convened after October 1997. People interested in obtaining a public absolution of the Ramseys would have to get the matter before a jury seated after that date. Denver District Attorney Bill Ritter, who had been involved in drafting the new law, and was also on a team of district attorneys advising Hunter, denied that the legislation had been written with the Ramsey case in mind, but there was little question that a grand jury investigation had been repeatedly delayed by backstage maneuvers, as well as a series of much below-age summits of experts and formal presentations of evidence. What the Whites describe as well-publicized but clumsy attempts by the district attorney and police leadership to look busy. 4. That the intention of convening the grand jury was actually to seal away facts, evidence, and such. The people running the investigation had long ago decided against filing charges in the case, the Whites wrote. Their motivation for presenting the case to a grand jury has little or nothing to do with obtaining new evidence, grilling reluctant witnesses, or returning an indictment, and everything to do with sealing away facts, circumstances, and evidence gathered in the investigation in a grand jury transcript. I can't help but to think that Fleet White was onto something here. What if Lockheed Martin was doing a lot more behind the scenes, trying to influence the things happening in this case, and helping the Ramseys? How else could someone explain all of this? More so, why don't more people discuss this possibility? Side comment, but look at the novel's instructions. Don't call the police, or we will kill her. What did they do? Call the police. There's the justification for her death. In our terror, we disobeyed the faction, and they did kill her. But if they were still inside the house, she would have been freshly dead, not stiff in rigor. Also, no kidnapper keeps the target inside their own home. You will be denied access to her remains. What do they do? Leave her dead body under the Christmas tree as they flee. The mention of being denied her remains and proper funeral are so interesting to me because, 1. It just seems like an odd thing for a criminal to bother with, thinking or mentioning. 2. The Ramseys would later make a huge fuss about the BPD trying to hold her body. The coroner arrived late, on the 26th of December, 1996, and he did the autopsy on the 27th of December, 1996. The body then had to be flown to Atlanta, Georgia, in time for preparations for the viewing/funeral. This requires at least 2 days: paperwork, scheduling, transportation. So let's say 28th of the 12th, or 29th of the 12th. The body would arrive preferably at least a day in advance for preparations to take place, so let's say 30th of the 12th. JonBenét's body was present in Atlanta, Georgia, for the funeral that was held on the 31st of the 12th, 1996. That's a reasonably quick time frame, quicker than I would expect. My brother died at age 46. His body was held for 3 weeks. The family was fine with this, as they did not know why he had died, and we knew that understanding his cause of death would help us with closure. Due to the time they took, we learned that he had an undiagnosed hereditary heart condition that led to a heart attack. This information has since made us more aware of our own risks and could save our lives, so I have a hard time understanding why a family would rush the body being returned, especially in a murder case, where forensics is critical for justice, could potentially save people's lives, help with closure, and if the Ramseys are innocent, possibly help eliminate them as suspects, and lessen the financial burdens of a defense / the negative consequences from lingering suspicions. I 100% believe Lockheed Martin was a factor in this case. Why couldn't the police get phone records, financial records? That shit is standard in an investigation. Am I to believe they're going to let a situation like this derail a $200 million sale? Oh, hell no. The longer I think about it, the more I believe John was on the phone with lawyers and probably people above him from Lockheed in the wee hours of the morning to discuss what was going on. That meeting in Atlanta was probably specifically intended to address all of this. In fact, more than a spoiled social reputation, this alone could have been the driving, motivating factor to cover up an accident at the hands of Burke or Pat, though my guess is Burke, especially with the potential discovery of familial SA at the hands of an autopsy or intense hospital examination were she to live. Why does no one talk about Lockheed Martin? They were definitely involved in the post-cover-up and investigation fuck-up, but I've never read anything about their involvement in the crime itself. Maybe John was on the phone with them when he disappeared after the non-ransom call. This is a case of the powerful and wealthy protecting its own. No one else would have received the courtesy of assumed innocence for so long. Point number 4 is the most compelling, and is the typical sinister motivation that is usually behind these things. The grand jury did indict Patsy and John, but on child endangerment and obstructing the scene. Awful indictment, sure, but still not for sexual abuse or murder. The DA not pursuing the case after the indictment is always going to be pretty fucking fishy, even if people say that's because no one wants to put a 9-year-old on a murder trial, and it's not his fault his parents didn't get hot for his behavior. Still, the grand jury is a beautiful way to seal up literally everything involved in this case, forever, that would expose exactly what really happened, especially the things still not made public that might show tendrils were touching this case that came from outside the domestic family situation. Would Lockheed go to these measures for what? $200 million bucks? That's how much they sold John's company for to GE. $200 million was not a lot of money for Lockheed Martin, even back in 1997. Hell, John's company just grossed $1 billion in sales for the last year, and $1 billion would still be pennies to the world's largest defense firm, and the biggest arms dealer on the planet. So I'm not really sure Lockheed Martin would care too much about the $200 million they were trying to get for the company, as much as they valued not having negative attention and press directed at them, which for LM would be worth way more than $200 million. There were also stock options involved on top of the $200 million up front, which could have been potentially worth billions, so maybe that is why. This whole thing is extremely sinister, and dear Lord, do I wish I could have access to the entire grand jury investigation that is now sealed up and locked away forever. They got more out of that deal than $200 million. They also got $2.75 billion worth of their own stocks back, which would strengthen their position against Northrop Grumman. So this was also a strategic move that could have earned them even more money had the federal government not stepped in and prevented them from buying Northrop Grumman. This isn't a super major story, but it might corroborate what goes on there. I trespassed on Skinwalker Ranch. 2021. Summer just started. Heading back west after taking a road trip to Colorado with a friend. Friend lived on the East Coast, caught a plane out of Denver when our trip was over. I'm driving back west and passing through Utah when I think to myself, where is Skinwalker Ranch? Turns out Skinwalker Ranch is not too far off my route back home, so I decide fuck it, I'll stop in. Get in mid/late afternoon, still good light in the sky, no clouds, perfect visibility. Go up to the gate first where people stop in to take pictures, just to look around. Nothing unusual, but the place does feel weird. What I didn't know beforehand was that there's a ton of people that live next to the ranch along the road leading up to it. Decide to get more risky. Park somewhat between two of the other properties in an area. Hopefully people won't fuck with me. There's a fence that surrounds the property and goes up onto a smaller ridge just next to the road. Figure it's a good place to start to get close without anyone seeing me. Go up, look around, still nothing. Decide to say fuck it and hop the fence. Start walking towards the main ridge overlooking the main portion of Skinwalker Ranch. Start to get that feeling like I'm being watched. Walking at angles where nobody should be able to see me. Start hearing the high-pitched whizzing sound that grows louder the closer I get to the top of the ridge. The whizzing sound is brief bursts of Z's. Turning my head around to see what it is. The sound is coming from every angle. Finally catch sight of the source. Turns out it's a pack of some 4 to 5 birds that are dive bombing my head. Not attacking me, just swooping down super close without touching me. Weird, but maybe they had a nest nearby. Keep walking. Eventually get to the top portion of the ridge where I can see far in every direction. Still feel like I'm being watched. Sit half lotus on the ridge and close my eyes, just reflecting on that emotion of being watched and trying to determine if it's in my head or not. I am clearly visible on top of the ridge, but sitting and not moving, so nobody could spot me easily. For whatever weird reason of mine, start whistling 2 notes, one high, one low. Do this repeatedly for about 30 minutes. Was out there for maybe an hour. Sun starts to set. I don't want to be here when it gets dark, heading back to my vehicle. I'm almost back to the fence when I hear from behind me in the direction of where I was sitting, the same 2 notes I whistled. Somebody else is not whistling in the spot where I was. Before I left, I looked around, could see in every direction and saw nobody, unless somebody was hiding and snuck up. After hearing the whistle, I walk faster, get to my vehicle. Somebody called the cops on me. I play it off cool and they let me go. Cops know I'm a tourist and asked me if I wanted to ask him some questions. Cop is native, tells me it's definitely skinwalkers. Say they get calls out here all the time and that the fences are facing the opposite direction from most ranch fences for some weird reason I don't remember. Kinda lame, but spooky when I was there. Would like to do more cryptid hunting in the future. Maybe have better stories then. Be me in late summer 2020. Car camping on the shore of Utah Lake. Me, my buddy, and his girlfriend, in before third wheel. Have a blast driving on the dirt roads around the lake in my buddy's girlfriend's Jeep. Get wasted and hang out around a fire till around 1 or 2 a.m. Decide it's time to sleep. We all crowd into the back of the Jeep. I don't know if you guys have ever been car camping, but the windows get really foggy. Wake up to extremely loud, violent pounding on the windows of the car. At first, thought it might have been rangers. Look around. Can't see shit because of the fog. Grab my handgun, open the door and say, "Who the fuck is there?" No response, so I get out of the car and look around. Don't see a soul. No footprints, besides the ones I just made in the mud. My buddy woke up too, and was freaked out. His girlfriend slept like a rock through the whole thing. Get back into the car and fall asleep. We wake up the next morning, light a fire, fuck around, and make breakfast. Eventually, we pack our shit and decide it's time to leave. Friend's girlfriend goes to start the car, and it won't start. We pop the hood, and there are a ton of oil-soaked rags jammed in random parts of the engine, and dry sticks thrown all over everything. We clean it all out and throw it away. Car starts perfectly fine. Now, could it have been a crazy meth head trying to fuck with us? I suppose so, but it's hard for me to believe even the weirdest meth-addicted fucker could get out of there faster than I hopped out of the car and leave no footprints behind. The sabotage seemed kind of like someone or something that had seen a car, but had no idea how they work. Other friends have had their windows knocked on by things they never catch a glimpse of in the area too. Grandpa used to tell me this sort of tall tale growing up. I can't do it justice, so I'm just gonna tell a condensed version of it. Grandpa is 14, living in the country. He has a best friend named Daniel. They steal a bottle of whiskey one day and look around for a place to stash it. Stumble upon a cave that's sort of hidden. It becomes their new hideout. Lots of days spent drinking and shooting the shit in the cave. Then one day Daniel moves away. Before he does, he and Grandpa visit the cave one last time. After they get a little tipsy, they do that bro shit where they tell each other that they love each other and make a pact to remain lifelong friends. Then they go their separate ways. Grandpa stops visiting the cave, and in time, he sort of forgets about it. Eventually, he grows up and marries my grandma. 10 years pass. He's still living in his hometown when he gets a visit from Daniel randomly. The two fall right back into their old friendship. Grandpa busts out some whiskey, and the two talk till late in the evening. Daniel mentions the cave. Asks Grandpa if he remembers the last time they were there. Grandpa says yes. Daniel then tells Grandpa that when he first got into town, he immediately went to the cave. He wanted to see if anything had changed. He found it, and as he approached, he heard voices. When I heard them, I got scared. Grandpa asks what scared him so much. Daniel says, because they were our voices. Grandpa asks Daniel what he means, sort of in disbelief. Daniel says, it was us. I heard us in there, making our pact. Kind of a tall tale, but the way Grandpa told it always gave me goosebumps.